From WKYC Studios and 3 News Investigates, this is Bomb City, USA, with your host, investigator Rachel Polansky.
I want to tell you a story about 5 guys that upended Cleveland. But before I get into it, you gotta understand the world they lived in.
Because he was killing people, and he was killing innocent people too.
And the thing you've gotta know about Cleveland in the 1970s, it was a mob town, where wise guys didn't just shoot their enemies, they blew them up.
When I got here, there was pieces of body all over the place.
My name is Rachel Polansky. I'm an investigative reporter at WKYC Studios in Cleveland, Ohio. And this is Bomb City, USA, a true story about organized crime, murder, and a fight for control that left everyone dead or behind bars. Over the next 4 episodes, I'll investigate Cleveland's underworld. Along the way, you'll hear stories never before told from former mobsters, killers, burglars, as well as FBI agents, cops, and informants.
Cleveland's a hell of a story, and it involves a number of criminal groups that work together. And if you want to tell it, you should start from the beginning, understand the whole thing from the beginning.
To a lot of people, he was the underdog. He was going up against Goliath.
First up, we're digging into Cleveland's most infamous criminal, Danny Greene.
Everybody likes the underdog, but the underdog doesn't win too often.
This is episode 1, The Irishman. The year is 1977. Jimmy Carter is sworn into office as the 39th president of the United States.
That in the end, we will triumph together.
People are lining city streets to watch the first Star Wars movie premiere on the big screen. And Elvis Presley has just died from a drug-induced heart attack at the young age of 42. In Lyndhurst, Ohio, your typical American suburb, just 15 miles east of Cleveland, Danny Greene has just finished a dental appointment to correct a painful loose filling. It's an overcast but 60-degree October day. He walks out of the office building and approaches his car. He knows to be careful. He's a walking target. But today, he isn't careful enough. A bomb hidden inside the car park next to his explodes. And it is an eruption that would rock Cleveland's underworld to its core. As police start arriving on the scene, a young FBI agent named Bob Frederick gets a call from his supervisor.
There was an explosion in Lyndhurst, and who was in the area could go see, because apparently they had already identified that the plate was a vehicle registered to Keith Ritson. And so they figured that Keith Ritson, who was an organized crime figure associated with Danny Greene, had been the one that was killed.
The sky is like a Cleveland Browns helmet, bright orange, when Bob arrives. It's the smell that triggers his memory.
Well, when I got there, you have 2 cars. One was the bomb car and then the victim's car, Ritz's car, and they were both in pieces. And there were still pieces of the body here and there, and there was smoke, but it was kind of a eerie smell, okay? And people were kind of standing around, sort of in shock, not knowing what had happened. By that time, they had the body on a gurney or a stretcher, whatever they call that thing there. And I said, "Let me see the body." And he pulled the sheet off the body there, and I said, "That's not Ritson, that's Danny Greene." So I was the one that identified the fact that he was Greene.
What's going through your mind?
Well, what's going through my mind is all of the bombings which we've had, Greene was a suspect in all of them. I said, well, they got the guy that was doing the bombing. I wasn't sad. You're not gonna be sad over, just thinking of, because there was innocent people that were killed.
Bob Frederick is retired now. He's in his 70s, still trim with gray hair. And I can tell he does not trust me right away. He's never spoken to a reporter before, and he is all FBI. Quiet, pensive, a little suspicious. It takes a few meetings before he finally lets me record our conversation.
You have to understand something. You haven't heard the story from the FBI. You've only heard it from everybody else out there.
It's a typical winter morning in Cleveland when I arrive at Bob's suburban home. We walk down into his basement, where there are plenty of dusty boxes filled with loose papers and black and white photos, remnants of his work as an FBI agent in the 70s and 80s.
I came into Cleveland in 1973. This was my first office. Just graduated from the academy down there in Quantico. And when I first got here, I did, for about 2 or 3, 4 months, maybe a little longer, I did applicant investigations and applicant backgrounds and fugitives. And then I was reassigned to the surveillance squad of the organized crime.
Bob spent the next 2 years doing surveillance on Cleveland's Mafia. He shows me a stack of black and white photos that he captured. One picture is James Jack White Licavoli, who took over the Cleveland family when former boss Johnny Scalish died without naming a successor. Licavoli is wearing a stained undershirt, sitting next to his underboss Leo Masseri in Cleveland's Little Italy.
What was happening was if someone wanted to talk to Jack, he'd have to at least tell Leo Masseri what he wanted to talk to Jack about. And then if Leo nodded and said he could, then he could. That's how that. And they were sitting out in front of the IAB club there, Italian American Brotherhood Club.
This is also around the time when Bob would meet Licavoli's arch rival, the Irishman, Danny Greene.
I talked to him on the street. One of the things I like to do is just go around and talk to everybody. I went out there, I said, you were in the Marine Corps, and I was in the Marine Corps. So we talked about Marine Corps, that kind of supersedes everything.
You gotta remember, during this time in the 1970s, Cleveland is a struggling Rust Belt city, known for its burning river and organized crime. Here's some old news coverage from my TV station, WKYC 3 News.
Both his legs are blowed off. That man will never walk no more long as he lives.
Another bomb bombing in 1977. Teamster Union official John Nardi was apparently trying to muscle in on the organized crime action.
Over a single 2-year stretch, there are 37 bombings in Cuyahoga County, 21 of them in the city of Cleveland, and 16 in our not-so-peaceful suburbs. The FBI estimates that Danny Greene is involved in 3 of every 4 of them. So who is this guy? And how does he end up on the Italians' hit list?
Being an orphan and growing up with the nuns, you tend to grow up rather edgy.
Well, those who knew him best say you have to start at the beginning. 3 days after Danny Greene is born in the 1930s, his mom, who suffers from medical complications, passes away. His dad, unable to deal with his wife's untimely death, finds solace in a bottle. Danny spends his first few years in a Catholic orphanage. When he turns 6, his grandfather takes him in, and they live in the Collinwood neighborhood on the east side of Cleveland.
Collinwood was a rough and tumble neighborhood, very rough and tumble, and we had the Italian Mafia, which was, when I was a kid, was called the Outfit. Mm-hmm. You had Danny Greene, you had Croatian, Slovenian, Lithuanian, black, gangsters. It was Jewish. It was the United Nations of gangsters here.
Even in childhood, Danny starts resisting authority. His teachers routinely kick him out of class, and he gets comfortable on the streets.
He grew up hustling. It's hard to take the hustle and larceny out of somebody who grew up with nothing.
Eventually, he drops out of high school and joins the Marines. When he returns home, he works on the Cleveland docks as a Union longshoreman. He finds success. The guys like him. He becomes a labor organizer and works his way up to president. I stopped by those same Cleveland docks in October, where Lake Erie's winds bite my skin, making the fall day feel crisp and cold. Large waves with white caps crash into the shoreline.
We load ships and we unload ships from all over the world, and plus the Great Lakes.
A lifelong Clevelander who looks to be in his mid-70s greets me on the docks. His name is John Baker, and he works in Danny Greene's old union job as longshoreman's president. He knows why I'm here and who I want to talk about.
Do you have any stories about him?
Well, I can't tell him. No, I worked for him. So did my brother.
He goes on to describe Danny as a proud Irishman who wore his emerald color pride on his sleeve.
Yeah, everything was green. Green tablets, green ink, green his car. He wore a lot of green suits.
Being Irish was Danny's brand, his logo, his identity.
He painted the inside the longshoreman's hall green. You know, everything was green.
You could not miss Danny Greene with that flaming red hair, driving that emerald Lincoln, and those green suits, and it was a sight to behold, I can assure you.
Back on the docks, John pulls out an envelope filled with a stack of old pay stubs and hands them to me. I flip through them and I see they're dated 1961, signed by Danny in bright green ink.
We worked for him for 2 or 3 years, and we thought he'd be something in his days.
As John goes through the timeline, he says ultimately, Danny's reign as the longshoremen's president did not last long. He tells me about the day Danny is forced to resign after he is caught stealing money.
He asked me, he says, I need your vote of confidence at the meeting tonight. And I told him I couldn't do it. And he walked away mad, of course. And he came to the meeting, and I didn't give him the vote of confidence, and he left mad. Everybody told him to get out. So he left.
In defeat, Danny's thirst for power only grew stronger. No one would disrespect him without consequences.
And something happened, and he changed.
And that's an attitude also shared by Danny's ex-wife, Nancy Greene. In Tommy Reed's 2009 documentary, The Rise and Fall of the Irishman.
Danny was very Jekyll and Hyde. I had a lot of bad experiences through the Hyde part. He would be very nice, then he could be very violent. It mattered what trigger you pulled that day.
Soon Danny would find himself on a new career path, and with it came enemies to confront, some to eliminate.
And then things really started heating up, and there was basically a war for control.
Historian and author Rick Perello meets me in the backyard of his Lyndhurst home. It's not far from the spot where Danny Greene took his last breath. The leaves have just started changing color. The weather is cool, but the pandemic keeps us from talking indoors. Rick has a unique perspective. He's a retired police chief in his late 50s, and he grew up in a family with deep Mafia roots.
So as a young boy, I learned that my grandfather, my father's father, had been killed, and that it had something to do with the mob back in the 1920s and 30s during Prohibition. In addition to my grandfather, 3 of his brothers, my uncles, had been murdered.
Rick's grandfather was one of the 7 Perello brothers. In the early 1900s, they migrated to the U.S. from Italy and settled in Cleveland. So did the 4 Leonardo brothers. The 2 families would share common ground. At first, they would establish themselves as businessmen who only dabbled in criminal activity. Prohibition did not stop alcohol use. It only changed the delivery model while increasing profits and violence. As we know, power tends to corrupt, and soon these men of 2 families would usher in the birth of the Cleveland Mafia.
Basically, that was what we call today the Sugar War, which was a series of battles over control of corn sugar, which was a very profitable commodity during Prohibition.
When Prohibition began in 1920, the Leonardos and the Perellos began supplying bootleggers with the corn sugar they needed to produce liquor. And Cleveland was an ideal location. Bootleggers embraced Lake Erie, bringing illegal liquor across the water. By 1926, they were making big money, and they parlayed those profits in casinos in Las Vegas and resort hotels in Florida. Around 1926, the Perello brothers decide to break away from the Leonardo brothers to start their own faction, complete with their own sugar wholesaling company. Rick and I take a drive to the neighborhood where the Porellos established that corn sugar business, on Upper Woodland Avenue on the east side of Cleveland. The Italians are gone now. It's largely an African-American neighborhood. Signs of poverty, abandoned houses, and shuttered businesses are at every corner.
So this was their neighborhood?
Yeah, this was their neighborhood. That's Woodland, the front of it, heading west, and then this would be 110th.
Needless to say, the Porellos' new business venture did not sit well with the Leonardo brothers. And in October 1927, Joe and John Leonardo met with the Porellos at their barber shop, the same spot Rick and I are sitting in right now.
The barber shop was next to that house.
It was a short but life-altering meeting. As the Leonardos entered, 2 gunmen opened fire, killing them immediately.
They were ambushed, basically. Joe Leonardo was killed inside the barber shop. John Leonardo tried to go after his, after the assailants, and he collapsed on the sidewalk outside and died out on the corner. Yeah, and there had been previous mob murders, bootleg-related murders, sugar war-related murders at that corner, and it was dubbed the Bloody Corner, 110th and Woodland.
Joe Porello won that day, and he got what he wanted, becoming the boss of the Cleveland Mafia family. But his success was fleeting. Around this same time, the remaining Leonardo loyalists began teaming up with an up-and-coming Italian mafia gang called the Mayfield Road Mob. The group formed in Cleveland's Little Italy neighborhood, and they wanted what the Porellos had: power and control.
It wasn't about we're going to have a peaceful separating of the ways here, you know what I mean? There was no prenup. They're going to kill you and take what I want.
In 1929, the Porello underboss was gunned down, and in 1930, the boss, Joe Porello, would meet the same fate. The Mayfield Road Mob was now in control, led by Johnny Scalish, who with a ruthless iron fist maintained control over 4 decades, becoming the longest reigning Cleveland mob boss.
John was a good-looking guy, mob guy, family guy, power monger. He really enjoyed that power.
The man talking does not want to be identified, but I can say that he personally knew all of the Italian players during this time, including Johnny Scalish.
Who put the fun in dysfunctional? They were all dysfunctional. They're all whacked out doing crazy stuff. The cousins, the aunts, the uncles, just the drama, if you will, that goes along in being the family.
Scalish took control in 1944 and remained boss until his death in 1976. During this time, he developed a close friendship with another local crime figure, Shonder Burns. We'll talk more about Burns and his deadly collision of power with Danny Greene in a minute. But first, Scalish would make one major mistake before his death. He would fail to clearly designate a successor, a move that would lead to chaos. For now, it was James Licavoli, more commonly known as Jack White, who assumed control.
Licavoli was as tough as they come. He was as tough as they come.
But behind the scenes, trouble was brewing from within the crime family, as Johnny Scalish's former underboss, who was slighted by Licavoli's rise to power, was making a move, scheming to take back control of the family. And he had a few guys in his corner, including Danny Greene and his Celtic Club.
If you were walking down the street and you had a problem with Mr. Patrick, that's what they called him, you knew you had a problem. But the guy who worked down at the factory, nah, he never had a problem with him.
As far as his involvement in organized crime, Danny Greene began as a protege of Alex Shonder Burns.
Shonder Burns, Scalish's close friend and underworld associate, was a Jewish mobster and one of Cleveland's most notorious racketeers.
Shonder Burns obviously wasn't a MAID member, but he was a longtime friend of the Mafia in Cleveland, going back to the 1930s.
Because Burns was not Italian, he could not become a made man or an official member of the Cleveland Mafia. But that did not stop him from working closely with them. At first, he used Danny as his enforcer.
He was responsible for doing the heavy work, intimidating people, maybe throwing a stick of dynamite to basically get someone to go along with what Chandra Burns was doing or what Frank Brancato was doing. But an enforcer basically is someone that is a strong-arm man. They're the muscle of the organization.
Later, Burns would have Greene running his bootlegging business while he was serving time behind bars. It wasn't until Burns was released from prison that their business relationship began to sour.
And they blamed each other for the loss of this money and started going after each other.
They settled their disputes in an unusual way. Bombs, specifically car bombs, became the weapon of choice.
I think the enforcers and the hitmen liked the idea of bombs because they liked the idea of not having to get too close to their targets. Some of them also thought, mistakenly thought, that all of the evidence would be destroyed in the explosion.
And that's probably what Greene thought in March 1975 when Chandra Burns was out drinking at a seedy go-go joint on Cleveland's west side.
Holy Saturday, the Saturday before Easter Sunday, at West 25th in Detroit, Chandra was killed. Chandra Burns was killed in a car bombing.
A reporter from my TV station was there and talked with an officer on the scene.
Underworld figure Alex Chandra Burns was bombed to death as he got into his car in a parking lot.
When I got here, there was pieces of body all over the place.
And the blame for that is placed largely with Danny Greene.
The explosion was so violent, Chandra Burns was blown in half. Danny Greene had declared war on the Italians.
He was a very proud Irishman, first of all. He was a very proud Irishman, Irish-American racketeer. And he was determined to largely replace the Italian-American Mafia, the well-entrenched Italian-American Mafia, with an Irish-American mob.
And the city of Cleveland was just starting to earn its nickname, Bomb City, USA. Less than 1 month after Burns was killed, another explosion rocked Collinwood. This time at Danny Greene's apartment, with him and his girlfriend inside.
There's not only one, but two significantly sized bombs that were placed next to his small apartment building and office on Waterloo in the Collinwood neighborhood of Cleveland. Only one of those went off. The other one was not properly wired, but the building was just about destroyed. And Danny Greene and his young girlfriend who were in there, pretty much they walked away unscathed.
Not a scratch on them. I stopped by that apartment a few months ago. All right, so it's just a vacant lot now here on Waterloo Road, but painted on the wall of the adjacent building is the word kaboom in bright orange and white with an exclamation point. I don't think that's accidental. These repeated attempts on Danny's life did not scare him. Instead, they fueled him. Here's Danny talking to another Cleveland reporter in the 1970s.
But I have no axe to grind, but if somebody wants to come after me, we're over here by the Celtic Club. I'm not hard to find.
His ex-wife Nancy attributes his survival to the luck of the Irish.
And after he survived that one, we knew that there would be many, many more. You heard of the cat with 9 lives, and obviously Danny had 9 of them.
While modern pop culturists have looked favorably on Danny Greene, painting him as a likable gangster, make no mistake, he was a brutal killer. And it's important to note that many of these bombings did end with the loss of life. Most of the time, it was the lives of fellow mobsters. But in at least one case, a bomb planted on an Italian mobster's car ended up killing his neighbor, an innocent man named Frank Persio, who was moving a car from a shared driveway so he could get to work.
I think the biggest misconception was Danny is a good guy. I mean, they still try to portray that.
That's retired FBI agent Bob Frederick again, and he tells me there's a reason he never talked with reporters before. He doesn't like the way some of my colleagues have portrayed Danny in the past, calling him, quote, the Robin Hood of Collinwood.
He was a good man for the neighborhood, took care of a lot of families that were in need, gave turkeys away for Christmas, gave turkeys away for Thanksgiving.
To a lot of people, he was the underdog. He was going up against Goliath. Everybody likes the underdog. but the underdog doesn't win too often.
And in these types of stories, yeah, I can see how Danny might be painted as a good guy.
He wasn't a good guy.
Why wasn't he a good guy?
Because he was killing people, and he was killing innocent people too.
But as we know from Scarface, every dog has his day, and Danny would have his. How Bob explains it, the Cleveland Mafia was not pleased when Danny killed Chandler Burns, but they wouldn't kill him for that. No, his execution order came when he killed Cleveland's underboss, Leo Masseri. Remember the man Bob had photographed sitting next to Jack White in Little Italy? Danny killed him too.
In order to do a hit, Cleveland had to get approval from the family they answered up to in New York. So they had to go to Fat Tony Salerno. And they got involved in this after Leo Masseri was killed. Leo Masseri was killed by Greene. Leo was a made guy, so that was when they decided we're going to have to take Greene out. So they went to New York, talked to Fat Tony, and got approval, so that was it.
And so it was, in October 1977, that Danny's Irish luck finally ran out. Mafia henchmen tapped his phone, and they knew he was heading to that dentist appointment. When Danny approached his car, a bomb hidden inside the car parked next to his exploded, and the Irishman was ripped apart.
Danny Greene also challenging the mob leadership, blown up in a parking lot in Lyndhurst.
Bob pulls out another photograph from one of his dusty boxes. It's graphic, of a man's detached arm and hand. He tells me it's Danny's, found some 100 feet away from the explosion. There's a ring on the man's pinky finger with a green stone, and it looks as though his index finger is pointing at someone or something. Maybe even the Italians, as if to say he'd get them back.
Danny Greene's murder is not how the story ends.
It's true, because in a twisted sort of way, Danny did get the last laugh when a witness emerged, a sketch artist who also happened to be the daughter of a suburban police officer.
She sees these two guys in this car. One's in the front seat, one's in the back seat. Ferrito's driving the car, but Karabi is in the back seat. So she thinks this is unusual. Then the bomb goes off. They get on the 271 there. She turns and gets on 271 also. Debbie Spoth was her name. Okay, so she's got a lot of guts, this girl. She pulls up alongside the getaway car and looks at him and then just falls back. And then she sketches, I showed you that sketch, she sketched Ferrito driving that car. Now her father was a police officer at Berea. So she takes that sketch to her father. Her father goes downtown to Cleveland Intelligence and gives that sketch to Andy Vanyo. Andy Vanyo looks at that sketch and says, that's Ray Ferrito. That's how he did it.
That sketch alone was not enough to lead to a conviction, but it wouldn't matter because Bob and his partner were about to find their own pot of gold.
We had the plates on both those cars. And so I'm looking at the registrations in the office. I'm looking at this stuff for probably a half an hour. And all of a sudden, when I'm looking at the validation sticker numbers, I realized they're one number apart. I about jumped out of my seat. And so then we went back to the BMV there in Mayfield, I think it was where that was. And she said, oh yeah, this would have to be the same person that registered both of these cars.
And that's how you were able to get Ferrito?
Well, that's more corroboration that it was Ferrito because Andy Vanyo had already said that's Ferrito from the sketch. All right, and then when we went out and did the search on Ferrito's house, he lived in Erie, Pennsylvania. Right on his, talk about coincidence. Right on his front seat of his car was a Cleveland magazine, open to a picture of Greene circled. And then we pulled down the visor. Joe Wiegis and I, Joe Wiegis said, we've hit the mother lode. And he pulls down the visor and out pops the registration for the car too.
Later, Ray Ferrito would talk to the FBI, and that would lead to a flurry of indictments against some of the most notorious mafia figures.
That bombing there and the resolution of that bombing just set off a trigger of case after case after case in this case.
And it would usher in one of the biggest trials of the century, not just in Cleveland, but in the United States. Coming up on Bomb City, USA, the aftermath.
He's a top man in Cleveland on the street right now in organized crime. And so it was very important that he was convicted. You combine this case, the results of this case, with the results of the Greene investigation, I can say positively that this is the most severe blow that's ever been struck against a La Cosa Nostra family in the United States.
Plus, hear from the man who killed Danny Greene.
Well, to me, it was like having a glass of wine. It didn't mean a thing to me. I killed him, and there was no remorse.
That part of the story next time on Bomb City, USA. This has been a production of WKYC Studios, reported and hosted by me, Rachel Polansky, produced by Phil Trexler, and edited by Gianni Catalano. Our digital director is Denise Pulverine. Our digital producer is Megan Hambaugh, and our archival researcher is Matt Hine. Original music is by the Narrowbacks. Special thanks to Mickey Burns, Adam Miller, John Atkins, Susan Moses, Mike Leonard, Will Johnson, Tom Doyle, Beth Domino, and Dominic Trickus. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to Bomb City, USA with Rachel Polansky from WKYC Studios. Subscribe now so you never miss an update. And find more on WKYC.com and the WKYC app.